Welcome to the program, Kristen. Thank you so much for joining. Super excited to talk about the CHRO Insights report from Checkr, driving solutions for the workforce of tomorrow. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm so excited to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. Thanks for having me.
No, this is awesome. We have a plethora of partners on all the time. This is the first time Checkr has been on, so I am super excited, especially after you guys just did this report. So let's not keep the audience waiting. Let's dive right into it. I know that the
Yes.
report said that CHROs said that AI resume screening is certainly something that they are looking into, specifically for bias reduction, because that is an issue, right? We as human beings are biased. You can see my little Jets hat in the corner. I'm biased against Patriots fans. I'll be the first to admit it. So we understand that humans have a bias, but why are so many teams struggling to find true, meaningful ROI from AI tools? As you know, we had this report from CHROs.
Yeah. So for context, this insights report that Checker just released examined the priorities of about 500 chief human resource officers, we'll call it CHROs for our convo, across multiple industries. These were surveys that were conducted and sourced and then conducted independently. And we just really wanted to understand like what are their top challenges, what are the solutions that they're really after, and what are the pain points that they're struggling with to improve their organizational impact. Um, so going back to your question around AI, almost 40% of the respondents said that they recommended using AI applications for resume screening and bias reduction. But that these teams really struggled to achieve ROI for a combination of reasons: budget limitations, internal resistance, challenges with customization. And I think a huge part of this, and I mean, obviously, bias, we're talking as partners, right? But a lot of this comes with these teams struggling to select vendors that do have integrated solutions. Finding solutions that have easy to use interfaces, that make it easy to understand or action on what they're seeing in their platforms. And then also just making sure that they're working with high quality data that's consistent across these systems. So thinking through like high quality data, the ability to function and actively work off of this data can change the results that they can see. So I think that's a huge part of what they're seeing. And then lastly, I think teams just struggle to make sure that these tools are really aligned with their business goals. So that, and then knowing what those business goals are so that the systems are trained at the onset is another thing that they can really do to make sure that they're overcoming some of these challenges and seeing AI return on investment.
Yeah, I think of my iPhone, right? I have a fitness tracker for, my gym workouts. I have one for biking,
Mhm.
one for running. All of this data is all in different places, and it makes sense that when you're trying to find ROI, you can say, "Hey, you went to the gym for 4 hours," but if you just sat there and drank their protein shakes the whole time, you're not going to get any results, right? So making sure that all of this is succinct and makes sense, I think is a huge portion of that. One thing you did talk about there was budget constraints. And I know the report
Yeah.
says 18% said that that is a top barrier. Now, I think of all, pretty much our entire news feed is filled with AI is going to take jobs, it's going to save you money, it's going to do all of these things. But it's a lot like buying an electric vehicle, right? It's going to save you gas in the long run, but you have to pay upfront for that vehicle. What do you think is the smartest way that CHROs are saying how they can justify an AI investment in such a tight economy? Because we're all tightening the belts a little bit, right? How can they get that initial purchase buying power in order to save money in the long run?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one in the sense that HR teams have quite a few tools in their technology stack, but I don't think that historically HR teams have had to go through the level of scrutiny that we're seeing now with justification. I mean, some of these tools are massive contracts that may become huge investments for the company. So it makes sense that we're having this conversation
Yeah.
as the costs are increasing, but the belts are tightening. Um, I think there's a few things that teams can consider when they're thinking about how they should be investing in AI. First of all, there are just so many process improvements that teams can benefit from by implementing AI. AI can streamline processes, which can reduce time to hire or improve the quality of hires. This can just reduce manual and often really repetitive work for HR teams that lead to improved, faster, and less biased outcomes. Um, there's just massive personnel benefits that your organization can see by working through some of these. So, um, there's just the positive employee experience for a candidate when you're thinking about really competitive hiring markets. Does having an sort of AI-led hiring experience that is faster, that's going to be more comprehensive, is that going to create a more kind of positive sentiment about your brand if a candidate's considering multiple offers? It's going to streamline things like communications and just ensure a really thorough experience for that candidate. Hiring teams are going to have less work, just that monotonous work. And then they're going to see the roles get filled faster. So that's great. And then by the hiring team having their work reduced, existing employees are going to feel more supported. They're going to have less burden when those open roles are filled faster, which is just going to lead to less attrition for your team overall, which is great. And then HR teams are going to be more satisfied. They're going to get back to more meaningful work. And all of these things combined, as if like any one of these benefits isn't enough, is just going to improve the bottom line. Checkr is a background checks company. We conducted a Forrester Total Economic Impact study, or TEI study, earlier this year, and they found that our processes completed the background check 5 days faster using these AI-led approaches. And that meant that companies were able to onboard and see revenue impacts from employees working 5 days faster. So they saw just an initial return on their upfront investment. So the an upfront product cost, the implementation cost, they saw their return on investment within 6 months. So when you're looking at a multi-year contract, it's going to pay dividends. So I think if you're struggling to get buy-in on these kinds of AI investments, can you present case studies like our TEI to your buying committee? Can you pitch a pilot program where you can show results and tangible benefits that might take into account how your organization is unique, because all of our organizations are unique in some way, shape, or form? Can these help you build a better business case? And then how can you present all of these findings in a way that really aligns with strategic business objectives, so that they're really seen as essential instead of discretionary?
Yeah, no, I first of all, 5 days faster is amazing. I come from a
Yeah.
background of talent acquisition and specifically staffing, and I remember like being, hey, they want to extend you an offer. You just have to go through a background check. And then it's just a waiting game. You're logging in every day, seeing if anything's changed. So, number one, that's fantastic. And I think removing some of those monotonous tasks is always going to be an advantage, right? Nobody wants to manually put in resume notes or to,
No.
kind of do the schedule interviews and things like that. It's a
Yeah.
challenge, right? That calendar gymnastics, as I like to put it. But of course, not everyone is ready to jump on the new wave, right? There are always going to be some people who dig their heels in the ground and say that they don't want change, right? In your report, I believe it was 17% said that there was an internal resistance to getting new tech, right? Specifically with hiring managers and recruiters on board. From, this survey, was there anything or any tips or tricks to kind of get buy-in from your organization, maybe to speed up that background check process or to remove some of those monotonous tasks, as you mentioned, in order to turn that 17% kind of and continue to go down? I think 17%, number one, is impressive already. That means what, 83% are on board immediately? Nobody wants to do less
Yeah,
work. But you need full buy-in for any
you
sort of
do.
technology to really be successful. So, what were the CHROs saying about that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, 17%, like when you think about how the average technology buying committee is like 6 or 7 people, and I think some of those surveys are old, like one negative naysayer could be your percentage there, and
Mhm.
that can totally tank the success of a project. So yeah, we're looking great on the whole, but I think we need to make sure that we're trying to get everyone on board. I think this is the part of the survey where I wish we could have some kind of follow-up dialogue with the respondents. Because in my experience, like when I was first reading through some of these results, like I was wondering, like, is this the hiring managers or the recruiters, since this was a survey of CHROs? I think it's natural for us to think about the people within their organization and whether or not those would be individuals that would need to be brought along differently. And in my experience talking with our customers, just generally speaking about their experiences in HR, the frontline teams are usually the ones who are most saddled with the burden of manual and like monotonous work. So they may often be the ones that are the most open to trying new technologies or wanting to be those like shadow use cases of AI to find some efficiencies because they're just so strapped. And it would give them the most time back. But let's assume that like HR org team members are that. So hiring managers or recruiters are the ones that are resisting change. How can you involve them earlier in the selection and implementation process? Can you provide them with clear demonstrations of how this technology can make their job easier, more efficient to alleviate some concerns? Can you identify like leaders within your org that would see the benefit that you can kind of build up as a champion and the sales process. If your team is geographically distributed or maybe even fully remote still, can you showcase how this is going to help teams stay connected across different locations? Or can you work with the vendor that you might be considering bringing on to offer training sessions or create support systems so that your employees feel confident in the technology that they're going to use? I think a good technology vendor nowadays can provide you with those kinds of resources, references, success stories so that you can sell a solution within your org so that people are willingly coming along the change instead of being forced through it. But then I think it's also really important to consider like, are there other adjacent teams that are actually that percentage that are resistant to change? Is it that your legal team is concerned with data or like compliance laws for us? Is your security team wanting to understand how sensitive data is used and stored? Does IT want to validate like how this fits within your technology ecosystem, which I know we're going to talk a lot more about tech stacks. I'm sure all of our listeners are really familiar with how large this like buying committee can actually be. So there are a lot of tactics that we could talk about that might be specific to given teams, but I think some of those ideas around how to bring people along are pretty applicable across those adjacent teams.
Yeah, I think whenever you're doing anything new, there's always going to be some detractors to change, right? I like to say anyone who
Totally.
says they like change has never moved before, right? And nobody likes moving, right? That's the perfect example of change. But if you can kind of spin it and say, well, this new neighborhood has a great school district, or it's within walking distance to your market, or wherever it may be, you start to get some more of that buy-in. But
Yeah.
as we move this conversation, forward, and we're not buying a house right now, although some of these technologies may feel like it with the cost that they come along with. I read in the report that only 25% say that their tech stack exceeds expectations, which I think is super important, right? Because when we look at organizations' websites, when we sit on demos, right, it is all the bells and whistles. They are, showcasing a Ferrari to sometimes maybe a Honda Civic budget. What do you think are some top tips from an organization perspective saying, hey, this works to it transforms? Is it some of the things that you mentioned there, such as onboarding, such as, touching base, making sure that folks are getting the best use out of the technology? Or is it in some cases just simply overselling, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we can understate, and I'm totally biased. I worked in customer success for my first 5 years working for technology companies,
Hmm.
and there are so many amazing features that just go unused by customers, right? So I think there's a huge benefit in making sure that the onboarding experience is successful, making sure that your technology is set up in a way that works for how your company needs to use it, right? Which might be a little different than how it's built out of the box. But I think universally, probably the two most important points that can really move the needle from something working to transforming are integrations and then the user experience. It's crazy to me to see some of these technologies that don't consider integrations table stakes with how their system works. And we were talking before about how there's like these systems that are still set up where you have to like enter a candidate's information in how many places, right? Once the candidate has put their information into your ATS through their submission, you shouldn't have to be putting their name into five other places, right? Allow the technologies to work and save someone the grueling work of typing the name over and over again, which also just is going to remove the risk of an error actually occurring. So I think integrations are a huge piece of it. And then the user experience is another huge piece of it. Um, Getting the user experience and thinking about it both as the admin, as an HR professional, you may or may not be the power user of the admin functions within your product. So thinking about it through that lens as you're evaluating solutions, thinking about the end users. So for us, we've got the HR team who is often selecting the background check vendor, but then their admins are often hiring managers at locations in a totally different state, in a different time zone, who have their own needs. And then the end users are often the candidates who need to be able to navigate these like complex forms. And I mean, there's just so much legal jargon in all of this. And historically in like four different places. And so, how can we take into account how we can make these systems work a little bit better for the admins, HR managers who are doing the hiring, maybe in our case, doing the adjudication, and then also the candidates or end users? I think these are just massive wins that by being selective about vendors can really make the experience feel so much more modern, complete, and easy to navigate.
Yeah, and you mentioned, things being competitive when it comes to candidates. It only takes the slightest inconvenience for a candidate to not fill out the rest of that form, right? If they have
Yeah,
competing offers and all other things are created equal, the
yeah,
organization that doesn't make them type their name in 7 times is probably going to be the one that wins in the end, right? Just because
yeah.
that is monotonous. Um,
Yeah, we're seeing just like anecdotally, sorry, like we're seeing in some
no,
industries that we're working with that like candidates in certain industries are gonna 60+% of the time take the first job that they're offered, or just in some certain industries, like 70 to 80% of candidates report that they will just drop out of an application process if something takes too long. So I think where you can remove these points of friction, whether it's human friction having to put their name in multiple systems, or the friction of the back end data entry that your HR team has to do that slows down the process elsewhere, all of these things are going to have massive like sentiment boosts for your organization, and then just the actual outcomes that you want of getting a customer or a candidate, excuse me, onboarded.
yeah, absolutely. And the piece of the puzzle that often gets overlooked in these conversations is the employees, right? And I know that
Hmm.
the CHROs ranked employee experience over some things that were top priorities in the past few years, right? DE&I, data strategies. What do you think are the biggest factors that make employee experience benefits pay off? Obviously, you want, when you hire someone, them to spend their entire career. I don't think that that is as popular as it may have been in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, right? Nobody gets a gold
Yeah.
watch on their way out anymore. But what are, some of the biggest things that can potentially make employees stay according to CHROs, since they're really that's a huge reflection on them when they're in, board meetings and executives. It's what does turnover look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, a huge part of the employee experience is making sure that just employee needs and expectations are set right, and tailoring initiatives to make sure that you're driving high engagement, satisfaction, and retention of your employees. When we were looking at this survey, one of the things that I thought was interesting adjacent to this was how respondents were thinking about the KPIs of their HR teams. And so some of the top KPIs that we saw, I think, map back really nicely to employee experience, and they kind of make sense. Quality of hire and employee turnover rate were the top two rated KPIs for HR teams. So, how can you kind of tie employee experience to these KPIs? I'm biased, but I think thoughtfully built technology can be a huge, huge win here. So For instance, that user experience, is it easy to read? Is it easy to navigate for candidates? And maybe for hiring managers, is it mobile friendly? Is the reporting easy? Is it straightforward to pull analytics or make insights about what's going on? Um, if you are able to complete steps in a process, you're going to get the top talent through the candidate funnel. And then if the systems that you're using in a post-hire environment are easy to navigate, easy to use, it's going to reduce your employee turnover. Um, Many of these components can be improved through the use of AI or automations that reduce work and improve the usability of the tools. So this kind of goes back to what we were chatting about before. When your experience is easy to use, when it's automated, when it's easily actionable, you can offer onboard and start employees faster. And so your candidate pool, you're just going to be able to scoop up the cream of the crop among your candidate pool. And like I said, we see that our customers are able to extend offers days and sometimes weeks in advance of what their competitors are. That's huge when you're thinking about the impact in a retail environment, for instance, where turnover is so high. And it's so important to make sure that you are getting the top talent that is interfacing with your customer and building brand sentiment with your customer, that hopefully leads to returns of your customers down the line and repeat buyers. So there's bottom line benefits there. And then the reduced turnover when you are creating these systems and using these technologies that are easy to use and they're going to create happy employees. And then the last thing I think with this is like, how can you track these stats before and after? I think it's really interesting having worked with teams in various parts of an organization. HR teams, I find, typically have a little bit less of that baseline data. And so, how can you collect that baseline data before you start some of these initiatives so that you can show the improvements after you've made these investments is huge. You can show the ROI of the original investment, and then that's just going to build confidence in your team's ability to execute initiatives that are going to create positive change for the org. So, definitely get the like post implementation KPIs, but don't underestimate the value of the baseline.
Oh yeah, and then that goes into I mean rolling out initiatives kind of one at a time, right? You never want to adopt a new technology and offer new EVP offerings at the same time, right? Because then you don't have there's that bias. There's bias everywhere, Kristen. We can't get away from it. But when you're looking at that kind of before and after snapshot, to ensure that you are trending in the right direction, then that there aren't external factors. You mentioned retail. If it's around the holiday season, right, there's going to be huge drop off rates, and those 3, 4, 5 extra days for waiting for an onboarding period or an offer letter are going to impact your numbers strategically. So comparing apples to apples. Now, all
Yeah.
of this kind of overarches and ties into EVP. And I think we are entering right a generationally diverse workforce. And typically, EVP for HR teams and organization has been kind of the top hitters, right, if you will.
hmm
Competitive pay, career development, work-life balance. As of late, we've started to see some new trends and things emerge. Do you think that organizations, when we talk to CHROs, are still sticking with their tried and true measures of kind of competitive pay, or from the research that's had in this report, are we starting to see new trends emerge into the future?
Yeah, so the report shows that like HR leaders are still ranking flexible working options, including hybrid and remote, as the most impactful practice for engaging employees across all generations. We know, of course, though, that like for certain industries that are hiring for service or labor roles, in-person work still required, and so we need to think about some other options. The report does dig into this a little bit. I thought it was really interesting that increasingly we're seeing inclusive training and like onboarding programs start to creep up on that ranking. And I think this is something that can be done during and after onboarding. It's not just through recruitment to create a very inclusive hiring environment that is going to bridge some of those generational gaps. I've seen this a ton in some of the industries that we're working with, like manufacturing and transportation, where they're really struggling to recruit and retain candidates from younger generations, but they're also facing massive rates of workforce retirement coming up in the next decade. And so I think that there's kind of like the soft skill component of how are you messaging things and creating that inclusive experience during onboarding, but then also how can you make image adjustments to how you are recruiting and marketing your organization so that your brand perception can evolve. And so we saw a little bit of that in the report as well. We saw that the survey showed that about the third most common strategy for CHROs this year is thinking about how they can effectively hire multi-generational talent. And a lot of that trickled down into tactical work like tailored recruitment and marketing. How can you target messaging for different generations with your TA outreach? I thought it was really interesting that Deloitte recently released a report that showed that 9 in 10 Gen Z and millennial workers said purpose was really important to their job satisfaction. And they're more likely to turn down work or employers that don't align with their values. And so when you're thinking about that, how can you incorporate that into your messaging? Instead of taking a one size fits all approach, can you tailor things based on generational considerations or maybe at a channel level thinking about that? Um, so I think TA teams can look for modern tools, whether it's how you're reaching the candidates and considering like social as a channel to try to reach younger teams, but then pairing that with message to make sure that it's easy for candidates to find your job, feel connected to your jobs, and then apply for your jobs.
Yeah, I mean everything is changing. You mentioned that retail work is one of the main drivers of in person, right? And we're still having this kind of hybrid versus remote battle on some of the more white collar roles as well. It's an interesting place to be in, which
Yeah.
I think kind of ties into this next portion of CHROs saying customization is truly a challenge, right? We see in the report that 35% of leaders prioritize the integration of hybrid work. We understand how systems being connected are vital to that because so many, learning sessions happened on whiteboards, right? In rooms, and you can't get that real experience when you're hybrid. I want to ask you, since CHROs are flagging customization as a challenge, do you think the days of recruiting for kind of a one size fits all, you mentioned the different generations, you mentioned the candidates that are more interested in purpose versus work-life balance and things like that. How much of that are we geared for in the future? Because it doesn't sound like if you just have a standalone career page with kind of some stock imagery that it's going to work anymore because there are so many different factors that are going into this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't.
Long-winded question. I apologize.
Yeah, no,
Sorry.
no. I mean, it's a great question, right? I'm biased. I sit within Checkr's marketing organization, and like, I just don't think that you can have a single message going to market and feel like it's going to land with everyone, right? Like, we're all so accustomed to such a hyper personalized experience as consumers. How would that not translate into how we're thinking about uh, the workforce and the kinds of companies we want to work for? And we're not one size fits all when it comes to what we value, right? Like we're in a very diverse landscape right now. And so of course, like what matters to me isn't going to matter to you.
Mhm.
And so as a hiring team, we should be reflecting that there's many reasons why someone might want to work for you and be able to showcase that in a way that people can self-educate. Um, from like a sales side, we know that people are going to complete like 80% of their buying cycle before they ever connect with your brand. Why would we not think that the same thing is happening on the employee side, right? Like,
Yeah.
of course, I'm going to be researching what your company is like to work for. What do you value? And what are the benefits that you offer holistically to me as a prospective employee? So I think the ways that we can show that in different ways, in different mediums, people learn in a ton of different ways. I think it's going to be hugely advantageous for brands to be able to attract the best talent and let people opt in on the message that resonates with them. And then when you have this like integrated system, right, then you can even see what kinds of messages are resonating with the candidate and then allow your TA teams to lead with those sorts of value propositions when you're getting candidates on the line.
Yeah, I think of the customization from a marketing lens for some of the biggest brands in the world, right? And I'm not talking about Fortune 500 companies, sports franchises, right? Oh, where we sit right outside of Philadelphia, there is a beach towel giveaway for, children under the age of 12. And then the next night it's Dollar Dog Night, which incorporates a totally different audience. all of this is going for people who want to attend baseball games, right? And that sounds a little bit ridiculous to compare it to a career search, but we have to target these specific audiences with different messaging in order to resonate them. Because if we don't, someone else is, right? And it may not be a direct competitor in your field, but with everything being so digital and so global, there's nothing stopping you in Colorado, right? To
Yeah.
working a job, probably in California, or me in California, aside from the time difference, and I can't stay up that late working. But nonetheless, you understand, like these things are all factors for what makes your organization unique, and it's going to be different to every individual that touches really your brand as a whole, which
Yeah.
brings me to kind of my next question, which is, I know the report said that I think it was 70% of CHROs feel that HR is very agile. I myself would be in the 30% that think that HR is not very agile because I've gone through hiring processes. I understand the importance of data, of regulation, of all sorts of things. Why do you think that there is such a discrepancy there from CHRO's perspective that says, hey, we're willing to try new things, and others are saying, no, we kind of have to play this by the book? It seems like a big difference when you're reaching out to 500 CHROs.
Yeah, I mean, 500 feels like pretty statistically significant, right?
Yeah,
Like we should
I would say
assume
so.
that there's, yeah. I don't know. It's interesting. It is interesting, right? Because like as a candidate, you've the classic experience of like chatting with someone in TA, and then it's like, well, what's the hiring experience? And it's like the 7 steps that you have to take, right? Or even just trying to get through like a technology implementation, and then just all of the process steps that need to be mapped and incorporated into an implementation. It doesn't seem super agile. I think the signs that we saw coming out of the report were just kind of like a lack of responsiveness to change. How teams struggled. There's threads throughout the report on how teams struggle to implement new processes or new technologies. I think it's easy to kind of infer that our teams need to be a little bit more agile, maybe adopt a little bit more of a growth mindset. Um, and so I think figuring out how you can speed up decision making or allow your teams maybe closer to an IC level to pivot in response to shifting business needs, especially in the current economic climate, can help a team improve its adaptability. And then also like when you're giving a little bit more flexibility for being agile and being growth minded, I think it just facilitates an environment where HR teams are freed up to focus more on strategic work, dynamic work. When I talk with HR professionals at conferences like or customers, the thing that I hear the most often is that like they're so weighted down in the process that they don't feel like they get to do the program development or the connections with internal stakeholders or candidates that they really got into the profession for. And so, can adopting this growth mindset allow those individuals to get back to that dynamic work that's really probably going to drive a lot of growth within your organization and more of the long-term success for your org.
Yeah, it's tough to be creative when you're in Excel sheets all day long, right? And,
Really.
and we're trying to avoid Excel sheets, but it's still what happens. I think we're never going to get away from them. I hope we do. Do you think we'll ever get away? This is completely off script. You think we'll ever get away from Excel sheets?
No, but like the longer I'm in the profession, I actually like them more. So
I
I'm
do
I'm
too.
the wrong person to ask, Devin.
I know I'm learning tabs and all sorts of formulas now. My younger self would
Yeah.
hate me, but neither here nor
Either that or
there.
he'd be so impressed. Let's look at it
Yes,
positively.
you are absolutely right. That is
Yeah.
what young Devin would say. I think it's very tough to stay agile in, as you mentioned, this economic climate, right? Where
Yeah.
everyone is tightening the belt, where everyone is expecting things lightning quick, and where organizations are still being bogged down with some of these tough tasks that can be automated, especially if 17% of individuals saying that they aren't willing to, adopt new change. All it takes is one person to not adopt your technology to completely crumble an entire department funnel, right? That is all that is required. So all of these things are combined to kind of create this perfect storm of change. I think that's coming, or it may already be here, as you mentioned. The kind of retirement age of some folks is coming up. There's going to be a huge shift, and now is the time to really make these changes. We talked about a lot of KPIs that are significant to CHROs. I want to ask you, do you think that there is one that is underutilized at the moment? Because we all know about quality of hire, we all know about turnover rate and time to fill. What is one that you think 2025 and beyond individuals are going to start looking at and saying, this is what we really need to pay attention to?
Yeah, I think the two that were most surprising to me were the employee engagement scores or lack of utilization of employee engagement scores, and then just general program ROI. Analyzing engagement data can provide so much valuable information about satisfaction, productivity, retention risks. In tough hiring markets like we've seen post-COVID, keeping up to date on these can help you get ahead of or potentially even mitigate turnover. And turnover burdens your existing employees. It is such a drain on your management layer. And it can just create this backlog of hiring that is so draining for HR teams. I've seen that across so many industries that we work with where teams are just constantly feeling like they're hiring. So where we can get ahead of unnecessary voluntary attrition, I think looking at engagement data can be a huge benefit. And so that would be one. Um, and then the other, especially in this economic climate, just understanding and reporting on the total return on investment of your HR program, I think is a massively underutilized metric. Like we've said, budgets are being scrutinized left and right. How can you defend the budget that you have at present? So many teams that I'm talking with are being told that they have to do more or hit certain metrics, but then they have to do it with the same size team or even a potentially reduced team. And so making sure that you are protecting the investments that the business has already made in HR, or even potentially showing such a stellar return on investment that you're able to ask for more budget to be able to unlock new programs, I think is a huge win that tracking and reporting on program ROI can help accomplish.
Yeah, I think it's all about telling a story, right? Using the data and the metrics to really paint the picture of what challenges you have as you're being asked more with less, or need to do more with the same amount of individuals. It's certainly a challenge. Which I want to ask you, when it comes to telling a story with data, do you think that is more challenging to do than actually influencing with it? Is If you have disjointed systems to connect all of that and paint a pretty picture that somebody won't poke holes in it? Or is it, hey, we have this data here. Can I get your buy-in? Can we get you on our side to maybe invest in that new technology? Maybe shorten our background check, by 5 days in order to get some more hires. Which of those do you think is more challenging for teams from an HR leader's perspective, as the report says, and your
Yeah,
conversations as a whole?
yeah. So the report shows that about a third of HR leaders feel like the data collection side is actually harder. And anecdotally, that kind of tracks for me with conversations that I've had with customers, right? Like we talked about before, these are teams that have not historically had the same depth of technology stack and use of data that we are seeing they have access to and are adopting now. So I think that makes sense. There are also just so many cool tools now that you can use, and it's kind of mind-boggling to me. We had a team training just yesterday around like all of Google Gemini's new data visualization tools. And so I think there's so many ways that you can take data from disparate systems, drop them into a spreadsheet, and then leverage AI to create visualizations, slides, documents, things that make it easy for teams to digest. I think that kind of is like both, but both are possible. And then making sure that you're adding like the extra context to the data that you're collecting and the story that you're telling is super important. So that the context that you assume people are going to collect from it isn't actually, it is absolutely collected from the audience.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's the chicken or the egg, right? You need both the influence in order to actually have the buying power, but you need that data beforehand, and compiling it with Gen AI and with tools like you mentioned, Gemini, making beautiful slides. Of course, we're talking to HR professionals, so you never disclose any personal information, any information that could get you in trouble through any of these AI tools.
Yeah.
But it's truly going to be a real game changer, I think, in the future, is painting that story of where you were in 2024, where you are now in 2025 as we're all experimenting, and then 2026, where that room for improvement is, right? And it sounds like these CHROs within the report, the 500, that great sample size, we're trending in the right direction for where we want to be, right? They understand employee experience is necessary. The candidate experience has always been necessary, but now we need to really ramp it up for this next generation of individuals, and or the next generation of talent, I should say. And I'm excited about it. I'm excited to see what Checkr has to offer. Kristen, before I let you go, I know I bounced around a little bit on our questions, so I apologize. I was in kind of a flow state there for a moment, and I was enjoying our conversation. Is there anything that I missed? Anything that you wanted to drive home to the audience before we sign off and say goodbye?
No, I mean, I just think definitely feel free to check out the report on checkr.com, and definitely think about how you can drive so much automation and improved outcomes for, yes, for your candidates, but also just for your HR teams and taking care of professionals who take care of the rest of us. So
Yeah.
thanks for having me. It's been a great conversation and really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And it's checkr.com, right?
Hmm.
CHECKR.com. Got it right?
Yes, yes.
Perfect.
We
Thank you
only
so
like
much.
half the vowels. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate. We don't have the time for all the vowels.
We don't have
That's
the
what's.
time for all the vowels.
We
Yeah.
ran out of money to buy anymore. But thank you so much. I appreciate it, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks.